like I'm like, cheese.
Yeah, I know. We learned the last time we did this, we are live. The last time we did this, we were both like grumpy faced, and that's what showed on the social feed for the next few weeks. I'm Craig Lindell from Waiting for Next Year. He's Andrew Schnicke. We are here doing the waitingfornextyear.com podcast live. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter via Periscope, something like that. Um, and so, yeah, we're having fun doing it this way. Some of you are listening on the audio feed, which is cool. And we have a few things to talk about. Number one, it appears like we're not going to have an Ohio State football season.
Yeah, moment of silence for the loss of college football. Yeah, I, you know, I'm not surprised by it. I've seen a lot of reaction, and some people seem like really surprised. Like, I can't believe they're doing this. But I've been saying for probably at least a month that there's not going to be college football. I mean, to me, the writing was just on the wall that this. And first of all, maybe when it was like May, like maybe around like late May, I think, when our numbers were not that bad. I kind of thought, well, maybe, maybe if we just keep weeding this thing out. But then once June and July came and our numbers across the nation just skyrocketed, it was over. There's no, and the big issue, of course, and there's a lot of different angles we can talk about, but the big issue, I think, is the liability. I think the liability is, at the end of the day, what the school presidents, and you got to remember, that's the coaches and ads, they can say whatever they want. It's the presidents who are going to make this decision, and they're going to talk not just to the medical experts, but they're going to be talking to lawyers, and they're going to figure out what their liability is, and it's just not worth it at the end of the day.
So if you can imagine, put yourself in a time machine and imagine yourself back in April or May when we knew even less than we know today. I kind of thought there was a chance that we would rally around sports and we would do something like college football, because this may sound really dumb with where we are today and the way we think about things today, but I thought there was a chance that we would be okay with a certain number of cases, or that we would be accepting of a certain amount of risk. Mm-hmm. And I'm not being critical. I'm not saying we should be. I'm saying we are at a place where we are not accepting of that level of risk. And certainly institutions, to your point, like Ohio State, like the Big Ten at large, and other leagues too, of course, are not willing to accept that kind of a downside risk. And I'm sure some part of the calculation is liability, for sure. Absolutely. But I thought that there was a chance that we were going to be okay with a certain number of positives, and that we wouldn't be overly concerned about it. But as it turns out, there's enough fear about the long-term implications of getting this disease and the side effects, not just being really, really sick. If we could all get through it by just being really, really sick for 6 or 7 days, I don't think anybody would be talking at all like this. But because there are thoughts that it could have long-term impact on your lungs or your heart or other body parts, other, vital organs, I think that's why we find ourselves where we find ourselves.
I think what you really touched on there, that I think is another big driving point, it ties very closely to the liability issue, is especially the recent stuff coming out about the people with the heart damage and the potential long-term implications of that. Because I felt like all it really takes is one person to get sick, have some kind of long-term implications, not get drafted because of it, and now there's a potential for a lawsuit there. And that's the big difference between, I think, I don't know, you're going to hear one of the most common comebacks or retorts that I hear is, well, why is it safe for students? Because like Ohio State, for example, is having students back on campus. And I think the difference there is that, or at least one of the differences, there's probably several, but I think the big difference there is that those long-term implications don't necessarily affect their vocation in the same way it directly does to a college football player. There's so much money at stake for these guys, and they're making none of it right now. So, again, they're assuming all of this risk, and they're not getting any cut of the pie that's coming out of this. And that's, if you another issue we can get to in a second is the optics of it. But I think if these players started to come up with lung issues and heart damage, and they're not able to get drafted or perform as well, you just open yourself up to a lot of liability, I guess.
No, and to your point, like one of the most famous hockey players from Boston University is Travis Roy or Travis Y. I can't remember how they pronounce his last name. And he I think I'm going to be embarrassed if I got his name wrong, but he got famously, he was paralyzed in a game. Mm-hmm. And, he became kind of an ambassador to the program and at the school and all this kind of stuff. That's like 1 in a million. I don't know what the actual odds are, but he's 1 in a million. The wide receiver who snaps his leg at Alabama in his senior year and then never gets to go to the draft, that's a risk that we're all kind of willing to take. That's just bad luck. Mm-hmm. That's a liability that everybody's accepting of. This is like new, and maybe maybe 2 years from now, if we aren't able to eradicate this completely and totally, maybe we treat COVID differently, and maybe it's a risk worth taking. But now at this moment in time, before we've gotten to the vaccines, before we've gotten to the treatments, before we understand completely what it is we're dealing with, that there will be a point where we'll be like, well, we got to live our lives with COVID. Sure. But until we get our first try at vaccines, until we get our first try at getting through the process, it's just too early. It's just too early. Mm-hmm. Although I don't know if you heard the interview, Ken Carman, and Anthony Lima were talking to Joe Thomas today, and he wasn't like advocating or arguing because he's a reasonable guy. He was just pointing out, and I thought it was really compelling or interesting, worth considering, that just because you don't play college football doesn't really remove COVID from the lives of these football players. Like whether they play football or not, correct, they're going to be dealing with COVID this year. So there is a case to be made, or at least a consideration to be made, that if you're going to have to deal with COVID one way or another, is it really that much riskier to play football at the same time? Maybe it is. But there is some downside, and you've got to weigh. I thought it was a very reasonable take. He wasn't going stupid, conservative, overly scared people not playing football. It was like, look, there's other considerations. There are other things on the scale and the balance.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think that is one of the ways that COVID is different from, just, an awful leg, breaking your leg or tearing your knee or even being paralyzed. I think all players accept that, an injury inside of the sport is part of the game, and that's something that can happen. COVID right now, it just feels like that's sort of different from the game, and that's something that encompasses, all of life. So I would say, I think that's a really good point by Joe. I think, he's right. You not playing football doesn't inherently mean you can't get COVID still. There's all kinds of different avenues of risk in life. I just think that, the school can sort of separate their role if they can say, well, we canceled the football and they did that on their own. I think that, again, that boils down, it comes back to the liability issue. I really feel that it's just, we are such a litigious society, and, so many decisions on so many levels in our day-to-day lives are made on the basis of liability. And I mean, you being in the insurance industry, certainly you understand, the roles of liability in a lot of things, but from a legal standpoint, there's just so many times where I think a lot of people will just say, you have to weigh, is it really worth that risk of how much we could potentially lose in terms of that liability?
Well, and ultimately that's another part of it too, because a lot of people were talking about the waivers that Ohio State players had to allegedly sign to go to practice and all these kinds of things. And at a certain point, it doesn't matter what your waiver looks like. You can't uh, wave away liability and responsibility for like playing with guns together. Like
Right.
there's certain activities that are so inherently dangerous that even if you get somebody to sign a waiver, that you don't get to wave away your liability. And with the situation with COVID and how little we know, that's something these university presidents, the football players, and maybe even the football coaches, and maybe some of the athletic directors would be willing to push a waiver in front of people. But the university president, who's thinking more 10, 20, 30 years down the road, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I, I think too. I don't know, while you were talking there, another thing that popped in my head was something that one of my friends mentioned when I was talking about this, and they said, comparing it sort of to the concussion issue that the NFL went through, and this is sort of like the reverse of that, where the concussions, you had the concussions first, and then you had the studies that showed that link. And what's been really damning, I think, for college football, especially, has been the fact that all these studies have come out now showing that there's a connection between COVID and some of these long-term effects. And I think that that's sort of another thing that just tips it over that scale. So I these are all impossible. These are, we can talk in circles, and these are just impossible decisions that have to be made, because you try to be informed, and I read a lot about all this stuff, and I listen to podcasts about COVID-19, and I feel pretty informed on this, but there's so much we don't know. And that's the one thing I keep coming back to is I listen to the podcast and I read the articles, and you have all these experts, they say, well, this is what we know right now, but tomorrow we might learn something different. There's so much that they still don't fully understand about this virus and the way people react to it. There's no predicting why some people react the way they do to it and others don't. And that's one of those things too that just makes it's all a gamble. You can look at the percentage and say what percentage of people go to the hospital, what percentage of people have long-term effect, but you don't know, like, are you in that statistic or not? And these are just impossible, impossible decisions. And I don't know.
We've talked about it a lot behind the scenes at Waiting for Next Year. We've got a whole channel where we talk about this stuff every day. And I don't know if I compared it to this in that channel, but I compare it to why I lost my motivation to go cover Brown's training camp, where we were going and we were writing wrap-ups and we were covering it and we were talking about what we saw. But ultimately, it didn't matter how long we spent at training camp or how hard we looked at it. You couldn't actually learn anything. And I kind of feel the same way with COVID right now. It doesn't matter how many articles you read. You can swallow up every information, every trial study, every statistical measure that you can find, and it doesn't really matter, because we just have to wait and see how some things play out. And that's a really painful realization, that we can't study our way through it. We can't concentrate real hard and find our way through it. You just got to wait and see. And that sucks when you're talking about sports. It sucks when you're talking about a disease, especially one that's keeping us kind of locked in our homes and potentially without Ohio State football for the year.
Yeah, I think.
Do you think there's any chance at all that they force their way through and play some football?
I mean, is it possible that like that the SEC could be stubborn enough, to do it? Maybe. I mean, I know that the SEC and the ACC are still saying they're going to go forward, but at the end of the day, I think when push comes to shove, I just don't think they will. I think that I just feel like the writing's been on the wall for this, and I think these are the kind of things that people say, you know what, like, let's just err on the side of caution with this. And yeah, it sucks. Like, nobody wants to lose college football for a year, but it's 1 year. If you told me that we were deciding between giving up 5 years of college football or just playing with the risk, I think that decision might be very different. But I feel like it's awful for these kids who are seniors, and especially or people that this was their last chance. But I just think when push comes to shove, the sort of arithmetic on this says it's better to just wait and wait this out a little bit and see what happens. And who knows? Like, we have no idea what our world is going to look like in January. That might allow things to be better in February and March to potentially play a spring season. We certainly, none of us could have guessed in March and April that this is what August would look like. So to sit here and say that we know what the future is going to bring for all of this, I don't know. Like 3 or 4 months from now, I have no idea where we're going to be at scientifically and medically with this, where we're going to be at socially. Like if you really think about that, if we're hitting Christmas time and people still aren't able to gather and do things like that, there's a toll that's gonna come from all of this. So that's why I just think, like, to push anything right now doesn't make as much sense to me as it does to say, you know what, let's just chill out, let's relax, get through this, and and find out where we're at in a few months from now.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't have too much interest in talking about, what this means for the future. I think there's a realm of possibility that this could force everybody's hand in terms of figuring out the financial model. Because if these players were being paid, the risk would be a lot more similar to what we're dealing with in the NFL.
Yeah, and that's a complete and total difference between the two.
But the problem is that, right now the compensation is deferred. I mean, these guys are playing for dollars, but it's deferred dollars, and that's
well,
the real
some
problem.
of them are. Some of them are.
The ones that we're really talking about, like when the MAC decided to hang it up this year, yes, there are maybe 2 or 3, 4 or 5 players from the MAC who have meaningful NFL careers every year. But I get it. That is what it is. But the idea that the Big Ten, the SEC, et cetera, the power conferences, they do make that money. They do spread that money down the chain. The idea that there's such a disconnect between the revenue and the players, I mean, I think that'll really kind of come to the surface on this one. But I don't want to speculate too much about that either, because I don't want to bet against the I don't want to call it pure greed, but the unwillingness to share.
Sure.
Do you have anything else about college football before we kind of move on?
No, I don't think so. Just again, I think it really sucks for if this really if this happens and if they're not able to have it in the spring. I just think of people like Justin Fields and like how much that hurts for him, how much it hurts for Ohio State, and how much does it hurt for I hate using this example because I feel like it's lazy because a million people have said it over the last couple of days, but Joe Burrow, this guy who was barely considered even a draftable quarterback prior to his last season. And then all of a sudden he's the number 1 pick overall and everybody's excited to see it. So you just think how many guys have changed their life over their last season of college football, that year that it finally clicks. You put in all the work and you see all of that. And so I feel for all these players. I understand why they want to play so badly. I understand why the coaches want it. So I'm not going to sit here and say that anybody who wants college football to move forward, there's nothing wrong with wanting that. I'm just saying I understand why the school presidents are saying, you know what, we can't do this right now. So,
all right. So we go from one sports COVID story to another. Although this one, I don't think it needs to be quite so serious because we're not talking about a canceled season, at least as of yet. But the Indians, despite all the warning signs from the Marlins and the Cardinals and all the different things going on around baseball. The Indians have their own little COVID story with Plesac and Clevinger. But this one was weird because Plesac took the hit first, and then it came out later that Clevinger acted immaturely and inappropriately as well.
Immature is certainly the word for that. I mean, if this isn't the like textbook like big brother little brother situation, where little brother gets in trouble and big brother like tries to hide behind it and like not admit that he was there doing the same thing, that look,
the cover-up's always worse than the crime.
That's right. And that's why what Zach Plesac did was incredibly stupid, obviously, and obviously Mike Clevinger as well. But I am so much more disappointed in Clevinger than Plesac, and I think everybody is. Everybody feels that same way because, now I don't know how this came to light. I didn't hear, if they got caught or if
I don't
somebody
even know where
posted
they
on
went.
social media or I haven't heard anything like that. But when Plesac was found out that what he did, and the Indians didn't want him to be around the team, they didn't want him to fly with the team. So they sent him on a car service back to Cleveland. Clevinger keeps his mouth shut, doesn't say anything, even though he was with Plesac, and flies with the team, thus potentially exposing himself to everybody on that airplane. It's just you just feel like this has to have been drilled into these guys' heads. We have to make smart decisions, and the how you can not only make the decision to leave the hotel when you're not allowed to, but then to also, first of all, let your teammate take the fall totally by himself first and foremost, and then potentially double down on that and expose the rest of your teammates to a potential issue. I mean, we've seen with a couple other teams the way this thing spreads like wildfire on these teams when somebody gets it. So I think that's why it's so frustrating and why it's just like, Clev, like what are we doing here? Come on, I know you want to have a good time and I get it, but you have to be smarter than this. And certainly when Plesac gets found out, like you should have come forward and said, you know what, I was there with him, and accept that. And that's part of being a teammate. That's accountability. These are fundamentals of the locker room. Fundamentals of team building is that trust and reliability. You have to have that. And he betrayed all of that, and it's disappointing.
So I don't have any hot takes about this. My only thing is that, and I'm not pointing at you. I'm not pointing at anybody else. But the sounding off that everybody did on this, it was the world's easiest take.
Oh, for sure.
I don't blame anybody for having the take, but the amount of grandstanding and taking that people did on social media, the same types of people who probably did go an extra time to the grocery store or hit the bar or decided that they were bored and meandered their way through Target. Granted, they're not under the same set of rules,
sure,
but like none of us are perfect. We all make bargains and deals with ourselves, even throughout the COVID thing. I've been super, super conservative and careful, and my family has been relatively locked down basically since March. But even I have done a couple of things where I was like, yeah, I could have done without that, but I was bored and I found a reason to justify it.
Yeah. I mean, certainly I think, especially when it comes to, family and seeing family members that, you haven't seen in months, like you do that with quick math in your head, and you say, well, it's worth it to me to do this. Right. And so, we have no idea what exactly Plesac and Clevinger did. And so I'm not going to get in any judgments on that. I just think that while I agree with everything you certainly said, and I do agree that it's an easy target. The one thing that I think everybody kind of agrees on is the issue is is Carlos Carrasco. You know, that what he went through last year and being, because of his leukemia, being a high risk for complications to COVID. That's, I think, the thing that sort of elevates it. And that's why I don't know the last time I actually tweeted. You know, haven't been using Twitter much since the pandemic started. But I even put out a tweet talking a little bit about my disappointment and what they did. And it was solely because of Carrasco. And, you know, to an extent, Tito wasn't around the team then, but, you know, that's it. You know, we have some older coaches, and you just wish that better decisions would be made, certainly. And I think we all make mistakes, and I'm not sitting here saying they should just release them or suspend them for the rest of the season. You know,
but the talk turned quickly and behind the scenes at waiting for next year.
Well, if they want to trade him for some value and get some return, like that's a different that's a different conversation.
Clevinger's 29. It kind of fits their MO, you know?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, people can read it on the site. You know, in our roundtable discussion, I said, if the Indians trade Clevinger this year in a contending season, I'm done with them, you know. And then after this happened, I was like, well, maybe if we can get something for him.
I think I've skipped most of the Tribe roundtables. I don't know why. I just feel like I feel less qualified than everybody else who talks about the Tribe.
It's so great that you said that, because I sort of found myself in yesterday's roundtable, and I realized, like, I'm always so self-conscious when I talk Indians because we have the best Indians people. Like,
you know who the first one to do that to me was, and he's the nicest guy in the world, and he never like shamed
John
me.
Steiner.
John Steiner.
I figured, yeah.
When he wrote about baseball, I just felt dumber.
Yeah,
and that's not to take anything away from TD.
I was just gonna say the same thing.
TD is a man of the people.
He's all heart and passion, right? Like, yes. TD is pure heart and passion. I mean, if you know anything about TD, the second you know the guy, you get to know him, you understand his love and his passion for the Indians, and that just, he can't contain that, and that's awesome. And I loved having that be part of our writing for many years, and now I've listened to every single Dairy Brothers podcast. I absolutely love it. So I love it. But when Steiner came on board, it just was like, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about baseball. Like, I thought I knew baseball. Like, I don't know anything about baseball. I mean, he just elevated it. And then, you know, just through the years, you know, whether we're talking about, and I shouldn't start naming names because I'll forget people, because we've had so many incredible people.
But Jake Burns did this to me with the Browns too. Like, yeah, I was all heart and opinion, and then like Jake Burns was like breaking down film and the way you know. Anyway, any of the guys who broke down film,
sure,
and the way Gilbert knows the draft.
Oh,
like, I just stopped paying attention to the draft because I'm like, I'm never gonna. He knows it. I don't need to know it now.
yeah. I mean, we've certainly been blessed to have so many people that make us look dumb, and I'm happy to have that be part of the legacy of the site. But yeah, so I find myself, like, all of a sudden, like, I realized, like, before I knew what happened, I'm like, oh wait, I'm talking in a roundtable channel, which means this is, anybody can read this, and I'm, you know, Mitch is sitting there like talking circles around me, and I can't keep up because he knows so much more about this stuff. And Bodie chimes in, and Gerbs is in there, and I'm just like, I'm an idiot. I'm just an idiot. Like, I'm an idiot, but I just know I want my good Indians players. Like, I get upset when I lose good Indians players, and especially around a time when I feel like, I know we want to extend this window, but I feel like the Frankie window is our, like, legit window. Like, that's the real window. We might have, you know, I understand, you know, totally what Mitch
and
Mitch
it's not, but it's my happiness window.
Yeah. Well, and you know, and I get what they were saying about the fact that you just have to make the playoffs. Like, that's the biggest factor in baseball. Just make the playoffs, because then it becomes a crapshoot. Totally makes sense to me. Yet I still feel like I want as many good players on the Indians right now this season as we can. So if we're going to trade Mike Clevinger, let's get some people that are going to help us this year win the World Series this year. If, you know, I care much more about that than I do extending any kind of window. It's just the way I think about it. I can't help it. I'm a casual baseball fan, and I just want to see them, succeed in this opportunity. I want to win a World Series with Frankie and with J Ram, and Carlos Santana, like, and Cookie Carrasco, like all these guys that mean so much. Like, I want to win this World Series with these guys.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. And you mentioned Mitch, by the way, who's going to make his podcast debut on Thursday. So,
oh, excellent. Awesome.
Stay tuned for that.
Can't wait.
My spoiler alert, but we were going to rewatch Mad Men and do a
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't keep up. It derailed after 2 or 3 episodes.
Oh, poor Mitch. Mitch is going to be heartbroken.
But we'll talk about Mad Men a little bit anyway, and then we'll talk about the Indians, because that's where he really shines.
Excellent.
All right, so I think that kind of covers the sports canvas here. I don't think there's any Browns related anything to talk about today.
And nobody wants to hear me rant about the Red Wings in the NHL draft lottery, so I'll just keep that to myself in the Slack channel.
And if you want to talk about like a blind spot for us, the Blue Jackets, we're just not there.
I've got nothing to add to that. Yeah.
So the only thing that I will add before we hang up, when we started, before we went live, I was telling you that first of all, I built a shoestring budget home theater in my house.
Mm-hmm.
Tonight's movie was the Steven Spielberg, Tom Cruise War of the Worlds, which I think has become wildly underrated over the years. And you were saying you didn't really remember it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's been a forgotten movie, like not just underrated, but forgotten. Like, I don't know the last time somebody mentioned that movie to me, and so when you just said War of the Worlds when you mentioned, I was like, was that Tom Cruise? Like I had to think for a second even which movie that was, and all I remembered was like when like the big alien machine things coming in and scooping up the kids or something. Like I have like a vague memory of like how the beginning of that movie, because I think it was like really intense, but then I don't remember anything else about it. So
yeah, the first
maybe I need to rewatch that.
Yeah, it's on HBO Max. The first half hour of that movie is just pure Spielberg, beautiful build up. It flirts with being fun, and then quickly the smile disappears from Tom Cruise's face, and the seriousness of the situation comes to pass, and it's creepy. It's great. It's great. It sets a tone. It also looks strange. Like it's almost like it's overwashed in white or brightness. They boosted the brightness of the whole film to the point where it almost the movie almost glows, especially through the first half hour. It's very weird.
Yeah, I think I remember that. Now, did that get, you probably don't know this off the top of your head, but did that get nominated for like any of the any of the like cinematography or anything like that?
That's a good question. I'll look it up.
Because I mean, I do feel like there was a lot.
It got sound mixing, sound editing, visual effects, best achievement in visual effects.
Visual effects, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I certainly remember that movie being a big deal and people talking about it, but I haven't seen it since I saw it like right when it came out, and it's one of those movies like I couldn't even remember the plot until you reminded me a little bit.
It got nominated for a Razzie Award for Worst Actor, Tom Cruise.
Wow, that's that's gonna happen. You'll have that.
Yes. You actually hate to see it.
Yeah.
Because I'm introducing a 10 and a 7, almost 8-year-old to this movie, and I was like, so the dad guys, that's Tom Cruise, like, and then I'm thinking about it, and I said, he's maybe the most famous movie star of all time.
I mean, he has to be right up there. I mean,
right?
I would doubt anybody has made more money than he has.
It's like Tom Cruise, and then the people after him are Will Smith and The Rock.
Yeah, and I think it's easy for us to maybe forget because of like a lot of the Scientology stuff, but to forget, like, especially in the those like late 80s, early 90s, like how massive of a star he was, and everything he did was just I mean, he was a money making machine. You put Tom Cruise in a movie, and it was going to make a ton of money. And even doing like the Mission Impossible stuff, like he was. I would say, he was a pretty versatile actor too, in terms of being able to do physical parts and fairly meaty parts. I mean, is he the best actor of all time? No, he's not. But like
Top Gun, Jerry Maguire, Minority Report, Days of Thunder, Mission Impossible. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah,
it's insane. I mean, and we watched. My kids aren't old enough for Almost Famous yet, but we did watch another Cameron Crowe movie. We Bought a Zoo, which is okay.
Oh, I love that movie. I love that movie.
I do too, but it's not his best. It's not his best. It's not.
I didn't know that was Cameron Crowe though. I didn't know. I actually didn't know that was Cameron Crowe.
So, but Jerry Maguire's coming up next. A Few Good Men. I forgot about A Few Good Men. Yeah. How could you forget that?
But I love Almost Famous though. Almost Famous, incredible movie.
I have a tough time picking a number one movie of all time, but that one very well might be it for me. I mean,
yeah, like it hits like a lot of our wheelhouses, like as music fans, and and I've always appreciated the tone of Cameron Crowe's like love movies. Like his movies always have this like certain strained love story in them, and I'm always fascinated by it, and I always like that sentimentality, I guess, and
did you listen to the podcast that James Andrew Miller did, the 6-part about Almost Famous? You need to listen. It's amazing.
Okay. I've got something to.
He got interviews with Cameron Crowe, Nancy Wilson, Patrick Fugit, Penny Lane.
Man,
he got all the best actors. Did you know that originally Brad Pitt was supposed to be the guitar player?
Really? I don't know. Like, I don't know that would have been a good pick for that role. Like,
thank God he didn't do it, but he was supposed to be, Billy Crudup.
Billy Crudup was so good, man.
Kate Hudson wasn't supposed to be Penny Lane.
Oh,
it was supposed to be somebody else. I can't remember who it was supposed to be.
And again, that's another one that it's hard to imagine anybody else playing that role. I mean, she nailed that sort of hippie vibe, that.
Oh, she was supposed to be the sister, which Zooey Deschanel ended up playing.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, you need to listen to that podcast. Maybe we'll talk. Yeah. Maybe we'll do an Almost Famous podcast.
There we go. I like it.
We'll be the podcast about the podcast that discussed the movie.
And by the way, I was going to ask too, did you ever see Singles?
Oh yeah, of course.
The Cameron Crowe. Yeah. Like that one was like that came out like right at the perfect time with the whole Pearl Jam thing happening, and me as a kid like being super into Pearl Jam. That was like Singles was like my first favorite movie. Like that was a movie I had that on VHS and I would just watch it all the time. And
it's
I
really
loved
funny because I agree with you, but I didn't get that movie until much later. Like,
for sure. I didn't either.
I didn't get it at all.
No, but it had Pearl Jam in it. Like,
I know.
Citizen Dick, man. It was great. But like, even the aesthetic of it, like the blue with the handwritten like scene breaks, the handwritten scene breaks. I like all the aesthetically, like everything about it was that pure 90s vibe, and I was just into that aspect of it. And I totally
was there any more actress of the moment than like Bridget Fonda?
Oh yeah,
she was the best.
Yeah, so great.
I want to rewatch Singles just to see what it means to me now that I'm in my 40s.
It's been a minute since I've seen it as well.
So, well, I think we did it. We're almost at 40 minutes. I appreciate jumping on with you. It's always a good time. We should end with a smile as well. All right. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you next time. It's been the waitingfornextyear.com podcast.